Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Today I've got something really creepy for you. 6 scary true stories that happened deep in the Appalachian woods. Trust me, after hearing these, you might think twice before going into those dark woods alone. Before we jump in, make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and give this video a thumbs up. Also, drop a comment and tell me what country you're from. Alright guys, let's get started with these bone-chilling stories. I'm 28 and work construction, or at least I did until the company laid half of us off last spring. Been doing drywall and roofing since high school, but when the housing market went sideways, guys like me were the first to go. My buddy Carlos had been dealing with his own problems, working double shifts at some chain restaurant, burning himself out in that hot kitchen for barely enough to cover rent. We'd been talking about taking a trip somewhere just to clear our heads and figure out what came next. Carlos suggested we do a section of the Appalachian Trail through Virginia, maybe 5 days of hiking to get away from everything. Neither of us were serious hikers, but we figured walking in the woods couldn't be that hard. Looking back now, I wish we'd stuck to the main trail. We drove down from Pennsylvania on a Thursday, parked at one of those trail access points near Shenandoah. The plan was simple: hike south for 2 days, camp wherever we found good spots, then loop back north to the car. Carlos brought his old camping gear from when his dad used to take him fishing, and I borrowed a backpack from my cousin who'd done some hiking in college. First 2 days went exactly like we hoped. Weather was perfect, cool mornings and warm afternoons. We saw other hikers here and there, everyone friendly and willing to share trail advice. Made camp the second night near a stream, cooked some instant noodles on Carlos's little camp stove, and felt like we were actually getting somewhere with this whole finding ourselves thing. On the third day, that's when everything went wrong. We'd been hiking for maybe 3 hours when we spotted this unmarked trail branching off to the east. It looked like it might lead up to some kind of overlook, the kind of scenic view you'd want to post pictures of. The trail was narrow, but well-worn, like people had been using it for years. This was the one who suggested we check it out, said we had plenty of time and might find something cool. I remember thinking it seemed fine, just a little side adventure. The path wound down into this hollow between 2 ridges, and the trees got bigger the further we went. I'm talking massive oaks and maples, the kind you don't see much anymore, trunks so wide you couldn't wrap your arms around them even with 3 people. After about an hour of hiking downhill, we came to this clearing beside a creek. It was the most perfect camping spot I'd ever seen. Flat ground, fresh water, surrounded by those giant trees like natural walls. But what struck me most was how untouched it felt. No trash, no fire rings, no carved initials on the trees. No stumps or cut branches, no worn patches where other people had set up tents. Carlos said it looked like we'd found a place that time forgot, and I laughed because it seemed like such a dramatic thing to say. We decided to camp there for the night instead of hiking back up to the main trail. Setting up camp felt easy, almost too easy. The ground was soft but not muddy, the creek was clear and cold, and there wasn't a single mosquito or black fly bothering us. As the sun went down, I kept thinking about how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, I mean completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind moving through the leaves. Even our voices seemed to get swallowed up by the trees. But we were tired from hiking, and it felt good to just sit by the water and eat our dinner. Carlos made jokes about us being the first people to ever camp in this spot, about how we'd discovered some secret wilderness area that wasn't on any maps. I went along with it because it felt special, like we'd found something that belonged just to us. When I woke up the next morning, my watch had stopped. Digital watch I'd worn for 2 years, never gave me any problem. It's just blank where the time should be. Carlos's phone was dead too, even though he'd charged it in the car the day before. My phone showed no signal, no time, no date, just the home screen, with none of the usual information. We figured it was just the mountains messing with electronics. Happens sometimes in remote areas. But when we started packing up to hike out, that's when things got really strange. The trail we'd taken down into the hollow looked completely different. The path was still there, but wider somehow, and the trees along it weren't the same ones we'd passed the day before. I'd marked a few big oaks with my knife on the way down, just little notches to help us find our way back. But now those trees had smooth bark, no cuts anywhere. When I looked back at our campsite, it wasn't a clearing anymore. Old-growth forest stretched from the creek all the way to where our tent had been, like we'd never been there at all. Carlos found the first arrowhead about 20 feet from where we'd slept, just sitting on top of the ground like someone had dropped it 5 minutes ago, sharp edges and everything. Then we started seeing pottery pieces, little shards of clay scattered around like broken dishes. Fresh breaks, not weathered or worn down by years of rain. I picked up a piece that had paint on it, red and black designs that looked handmade. It felt warm in my fingers, not cold like something that had been sitting in the dirt. That's when we realized we might not be seeing the hollow the way it really was. Or maybe we were seeing it from different times, all mixed together. Sometimes when I looked ahead on the trail, it went through thick forest. But if I blinked and looked again, I'd see cleared fields with stumps and wild grass. A few times I saw smoke rising from chimneys, but when we hiked toward it, there was nothing there except more trees. The other hikers we met made it worse. First group looked normal enough. Man and woman with day packs, wearing jeans and t-shirts. But their gear was all wrong. Canvas packs with leather straps, the kind my grandfather might have used, metal canteens instead of plastic water bottles. They said good morning and asked if we'd seen good camping spots ahead, just like any hikers would. But when Carlos showed them his phone to ask if they had signal, they looked at it like they'd never seen one before. They kept walking south and disappeared around a bend in the trail. Hour later, we met 3 guys with equipment that looked like it came from an Army surplus store, but old Army surplus. Everything olive green and heavy canvas, boots that were all leather with no synthetic materials. They were friendly enough, asked where we were hiking from and where we were headed. But when I mentioned the year, one of them laughed and said we must be confused, said it was 1987. Not like he was joking around, he seemed genuinely sure about it. They thought Carlos and I were the ones acting strange. Each group we met believed they were in their own present time. They could see us and talk to us, but they couldn't see the other groups, like we were all tuned to different radio stations. But somehow Carlos and I could pick up multiple frequencies. We'd be talking to people who thought it was the 1950s, and then meet others who were sure it was the 1990s. All of them hiking the same trail, camping in the same spots, but living in completely different decades. The hollow was keeping us all there, feeding off us somehow. I started finding old campsites with gear left behind. Tents from the 1970s, backpacks from the 1980s, sleeping bags and camp stoves from every decade going back 50 years or more. All of it just abandoned, like people had vanished in the middle of setting up or breaking camp. But the gear wasn't weathered or damaged. It looked like it had been used yesterday. Carlos found a journal in one of the abandoned campsites written by someone named Mark who'd gotten trapped in 1994. He described the exact same things we were experiencing. The time distortion, meeting hikers from different eras, finding artifacts that didn't belong. According to his entries, he'd been trying to hike out for what felt like a week, but kept ending up back in the hollow. The last entry just said, Day 12. Sarah aged 10 years overnight. I can see gray in her hair. Something is taking our time. That's when we understood what was happening to us. The hollow wasn't just mixing up time, it was stealing it. Carlos had started getting gray hairs at his temples, just a few strands, but definitely gray. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we'd arrived. I felt older too. Not physically tired, but something deeper. Like years of my life were being drained away, drop by drop. But the worst part was seeing ourselves. Multiple versions from different points in our experience. We watched 2 young guys who looked exactly like us setting up camp in the clearing, excited about finding this perfect hidden spot. They couldn't hear us when we yelled warnings. Then we saw older versions of ourselves, hair white and faces lined with age, still trying to find a way out after what must have been decades. They looked at us with recognition but couldn't speak, just pointed deeper into the forest with desperate expressions. The trees were people. Had to be. Some of the bigger oaks had bark patterns that looked almost like faces, expressions of fear or surprise carved into the wood. I found one that looked like a woman screaming, another that showed a man reaching out his hands. These were the hikers who'd been trapped so long that the hollow had absorbed them completely, turned them into part of the forest itself. They were still alive in there somehow, still conscious, just locked inside the trees for eternity. Carlos figured out that we'd been trapped for months, even though it only felt like we'd been there for days. Time was moving at different speeds for us, faster and slower depending on where we were in the hollow. We'd lived the same week over and over, but aged through it normally each time. Soon we'd be like the other people we'd seen, growing old and dying while stuck in this place, adding our life force to whatever ancient thing was controlling it all. I found the answer in a journal from the 1800s, written in handwriting that was hard to read. The writer claimed the hollow had been cursed by Cherokee people after settlers stole their land. The curse was designed to trap anyone who entered the hollow, making them pay for the theft by giving up their entire lives. Time would fold in on itself, keeping the victims alive across decades while slowly draining away their years. The only way out was to give back something valuable to the forest as payment for what had been taken. Carlos and I looked through everything we had, our phones, our watches, our camping gear. Nothing seemed valuable enough. Then I remembered my wedding ring from my marriage that had ended 2 years ago. I'd kept wearing it out of habit, even after the divorce was final. Carlos had his grandfather's ring that he always wore, said it was the only thing of value he owned. We found the oldest tree in the hollow, one of those massive oaks that had to be hundreds of years old. I dug a hole at its base with my camp shovel and buried both rings, along with all the cash we had, maybe $60 between us. As soon as the dirt covered them, things started changing. The different time periods began syncing up, decades of trapped people suddenly occupying the same moment. I saw hikers from every era we'd encountered, all standing in the same clearing, all finally able to see each other. Then they started aging, rapidly, catching up to where they should have been if time had moved normally. Decades passed in seconds as bodies withered and crumbled to dust, blown away by a wind that had finally returned to the hollow. The trees with human faces began to crack and split, releasing spirits that had been trapped for over a century. The air filled with voices, thanking us, saying goodbye, or just screaming as they finally found peace. A trail appeared that hadn't been there before, leading straight up and out of the hollow. We grabbed our packs and ran, feeling decades of stolen time rushing back into our bodies as we climbed. It was like being hit with the weight of all the years we'd lost, then getting them back all at once. My legs felt stronger, my vision clearer. Carlos's gray hair darkened back to its normal color. When we reached the main Appalachian Trail, our phones immediately picked up signal and showed the date. We'd been missing for 6 months. 6 months. Carlos's restaurant job was long gone, and my unemployment had run out. Our families had filed missing person reports, searched the mountains for weeks, given up hope of finding us alive. According to the rangers, dozens of hikers had vanished in that area over the years, and we were the first ones to ever come back. I still don't go hiking, not anywhere. Carlos moved to Arizona, said he needed to live somewhere with no big trees and no hollows. We don't talk much anymore, but when we do, we never mention those 6 months. People think we just went off the grid for a while, maybe had some kind of breakdown after losing our jobs. That's easier than trying to explain what really happened. Sometimes I dream about that clearing beside the creek, and I wake up checking my watch to make sure it's still running. I keep my grandfather's old analog clock on my nightstand now, something that doesn't depend on batteries or electronics, because I learned that time isn't something you can take for granted, and some places in the mountains have been keeping their own time a lot longer than we've been around to notice. Back when I was 32, I worked maintenance at this apartment complex in Knoxville. Name's Bobby, and honestly, the job wasn't bad, but city life was wearing me down something fierce. Every summer, my nephew Tyler would come stay with me while his parents worked their asses off trying to make ends meet. Tyler was 17 that year, one of those kids who spent all his free time watching survival videos on YouTube, dreaming about living off the land. He'd been bugging me for months about taking a real camping trip, not just car camping at some state park, but actual backcountry stuff. I figured we both needed to get away from concrete and traffic for a while, do some uncle-nephew bonding like my brother always talked about but never had time for. Tyler found this place called Laurel Ridge on some hiking forum. According to the posts, it was deep in Cherokee National Forest, far enough off the beaten path that most people never bothered with it. No crowds, no RVs, just thick woods and mountain laurel everywhere. Sounded perfect to me. We loaded up my old Ford with camping gear and enough food for a week, then drove these winding dirt roads for what felt like forever until we finally hit the trailhead. The hike in was about 3 miles through some of the thickest forest I'd ever seen. Ancient oak trees that must have been there since before the Cherokee got pushed out, and mountain laurel bushes so dense you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. We found this clearing that looked like it had been used as a campsite before. Old fire ring, some flat spots where tents had been pitched. Tyler was in heaven, talking nonstop about all the survival skills he wanted to practice. First day, we built some improvements to the shelter setup, collected enough firewood to last us the whole trip, and I have to admit, I felt pretty good about the whole thing. Felt like we were real woodsmen or something. That first evening, though, we started hearing these weird clicking sounds coming from the forest around us. Tyler said it sounded like Morse code, but the pattern kept changing and repeating in ways that didn't make any sense. I figured it was just some kind of insect or maybe woodpeckers we weren't familiar with. Mountain forests make all kinds of sounds you don't hear in the city, but Tyler was fascinated by it, kept trying to figure out if there was some kind of meaning to the clicks. We sat by the fire listening until pretty late, then turned in for the night. Second morning, I woke up and nearly jumped out of my skin. All the firewood we'd collected the day before had been stacked in this perfect triangular pyramid right next to our tent. I'm talking precise, like someone had used a ruler and level. Tyler was still asleep, so I walked around the whole campsite looking for footprints or any sign of who might have done it. Nothing. Not a single print in the dirt, and the forest floor was soft enough that anything bigger than a squirrel should have left some kind of mark. That's when I noticed the other stuff. Small twigs and branches arranged in these geometric patterns around the edges of our clearing. Little triangles and straight lines, all perfectly arranged like someone had been playing with them while we slept. Tyler's survival traps had been triggered too, but they were empty and reset in exactly the same positions he'd left them. When I woke him up and showed him everything, he got this excited look on his face like Christmas morning. "Uncle Bobby, this is incredible," he said. "Something intelligent did this. Something that understands patterns and shapes." I told him it was probably just other campers messing with us, but deep down I knew that didn't make sense. We'd hiked 3 miles through thick forest to get here, and we hadn't seen another soul on the trail. Plus, who the hell arranges firewood into perfect geometric shapes as a prank? The clicking sounds came back that afternoon, but this time they seemed to be coming from different directions at once, like there were multiple sources surrounding our campsite. Tyler spotted movement between the trees around midday. These tall, thin shapes that looked like they were walking on 2 legs, but moving all wrong. Too jerky and angular, like marionettes being controlled by someone who'd never seen a real person walk before. The strangest part was how they'd freeze the second we looked directly at them. One moment you'd catch this movement in your peripheral vision, turn your head, and there'd be nothing but trees and shadows. But the shadows seemed wrong somehow, like they were standing where shadows shouldn't be. By evening, I was starting to feel genuinely uneasy. We found these stick figures hanging from branches around our campsite. They were crude-looking, but had human proportions, definitely made by something with intelligence and hands. I wanted to take them down, but Tyler begged me not to touch them. "They're not threatening us," he said. "They're just curious." That night I heard Tyler talking to someone outside the tent. Low, conversational voices like he was having a normal chat with a friend. I unzipped the tent flap and found him standing at the edge of our clearing, having what looked like a full conversation with empty air. "Tyler, who are you talking to?" He turned to me with this confused expression. "The tall people. They're right there." He pointed at nothing but darkness between the trees. I couldn't see or hear anyone else, but Tyler insisted someone was talking back to him. He described these tall, thin people made of sticks and bark. said they were curious about our camping gear and wanted to learn human behaviors. According to him, they could mimic human voices perfectly, but apparently only he could see or hear them. That should have been my signal to pack up and get the hell out of there, both. Tyler seemed so fascinated by whatever he thought he was experiencing. I figured maybe it was just the isolation getting to him, or maybe he was sleepwalking or something. I'd never seen him act strange before, and he seemed lucid enough during the day. But his behavior started changing. He began copying these weird jerky movements, tilting his head at unnatural angles when he was listening to the forest. I'd catch him standing perfectly still for hours at a time, motionless like a wooden statue. He started leaving food offerings for what he called the stick people without telling me about it first. By the fourth day, Tyler was speaking in this clicking language, said the stick people were teaching it to him. His movements were becoming more angular and unnatural, like his joints were bending in ways they shouldn't. I caught him practicing walking with his knees hyperextending backwards, trying to copy whatever he thought he was seeing. His whole personality was changing. He became obsessed with geometric patterns and straight lines, arranged all our camping gear in precise triangular formations, started eating only foods that grew in straight lines, grass, certain roots he found in the forest. When I asked him about it, he claimed the stick people were older than the Cherokee, that they were the original inhabitants of this forest. They lived between the trees, camouflaged as dead branches and fallen logs, and only revealed themselves to humans they wanted to recruit for their tribe. That's when it hit me. Tyler wasn't just fascinated by whatever was happening here. He was being converted, slowly becoming one of them. I tried to convince him to leave, but he refused. Said the stick people needed him, that he was learning important things about living in harmony with the forest. His voice had this flat, mechanical quality to it, like he was reciting something he had memorized, rather than speaking his own thoughts. That last night I barely slept. Around 3 a.m, I heard the clicking sounds getting louder and closer. I unzipped the tent and saw dozens of stick figures emerging from the trees around our campsite. 8 feet tall, impossibly thin, made of woven branches with what looked like bark for skin. They moved with those same clicking sounds, communicating in rapid, twig-snapping language that somehow reminded me of insects talking to each other. Tyler walked toward them, and his movements matched their jerky gait perfectly. It was like watching him transform into something that wasn't quite human anymore. I grabbed him by the arm and started running toward where we'd parked the truck. Tyler fought me at first, but I'm bigger than him and I wasn't taking no for an answer. The stick people moved through the trees like they were part of the forest itself, following us, but not quite catching up. The paths seemed different in the dark, like the geography had changed while we weren't paying attention. The only thing that saved us was when I stopped and set fire to several of those stick figure totems we'd found around camp. The stick people made these terrible sounds, not screaming like animals or humans, but actual sounds of wood cracking and branches breaking under pressure. Tyler snapped out of whatever trance he'd been in and ran with me the rest of the way to the truck. We drove straight through the night and didn't stop until we hit a gas station in town. Tyler didn't remember most of what had happened, thought we'd just been camping normally for a few days. But he was different after that, quieter, more withdrawn. His parents said he stopped watching those survival videos and never talked about camping again. I never went back to Cherokee National Forest, and I damn sure never took Tyler camping again. Sometimes I wonder if those things are still out there, waiting between the trees for the next person curious enough to wander into their territory. Tyler's fine now, mostly. Got married last year, and works at a bank. But sometimes when I see him at family gatherings, I catch him tilting his head at weird angles when he thinks nobody's looking, and I remember those clicking sounds in the forest. I don't talk about this much because, honestly, who would believe it? But every now and then I'll see a news story about hikers going missing in national forests, and I can't help wondering if they wandered into the wrong clearing and met something that's been living in those woods a lot longer than any of us. My name's Tom, and I'm 35 now, still driving delivery for UPS out of Charlotte. Back in 2019, I was going through a pretty messy divorce, the kind where lawyers get involved and everything gets ugly real fast. My ex-wife Sarah was making things difficult about visitation with my daughter Jessica, who was 16 at the time. The whole thing was tearing Jessica up, watching her parents fight over custody schedules and who got what furniture. One weekend in October, she asked if we could go camping, just the two of us. Said she needed to get away from all the drama at home. Honestly, I needed it too. Work was stressful enough without coming home to legal papers and voicemails from attorneys. I'd been camping in Pisgah National Forest a few times growing up, so I figured that was a safe bet. It's about 2 hours west of Charlotte, up in the mountains near Asheville. Beautiful area, especially in fall when the leaves are changing. Jessica was excited about the trip. She'd been getting into making TikTok videos and wanted to film some nature content for her followers. I thought it was a good sign that she wanted to spend time with her old man instead of being glued to her phone all weekend. We packed up my truck with a 2-person tent, sleeping bags, and enough food for 3 days. The plan was simple. Find a nice spot by a stream, do some hiking, maybe catch some trout if we got lucky. We drove up on a Friday morning, took the Blue Ridge Parkway to one of the trailheads I remembered from when I was younger. The parking area was nearly empty, just a couple other cars belonging to day hikers who'd probably be out by afternoon. Jessica was already filming everything, doing one of those walking and talking videos where she explained to her phone camera how she was going camping with her dad for the first time in years. Made me realize how much I'd been missing while working over her time to afford the divorce lawyers. We hiked about 3 miles into the forest, following an old logging road that turned into a narrow trail. The deeper we went, the taller the pines got. Some of these trees had to be over 100 years old, massive trunks that would take 3 people holding hands to wrap around. We found a perfect spot about 50 yards off the main trail, next to a little mountain stream that was running clear and cold. You could hear it babbling over the rocks, and there was a flat area just big enough for our tent and a small campfire ring that someone had built with creek stones. Jessica immediately started filming everything: the stream, the trees, the tent setup. She was excited, talking to her phone about how quiet it was out here, how different from the city. And it really was quiet. Almost too quiet, if I'm being honest. I've spent plenty of time in the woods, and usually you hear birds, insects buzzing around, squirrels chattering in the branches. But this spot was just still. The only sound was the water running over the rocks and wind moving through the pine needles way up high. We got camp set up before sunset, cooked some hot dogs over the fire, and Jessica filmed a few more videos. She was showing her followers how to make s'mores, doing this whole instructional thing that actually made me laugh. It was good to see her happy for the first time in months. After dark, we sat by the fire and talked about school, her friends, anything except the divorce. For a while, it felt like old times, back when she was little and still thought her dad knew everything. That's when Jessica first noticed something weird with her phone. She was reviewing the videos she'd taken during the day, and she called me over to listen to one of them. "Dad, listen to this," she said, holding the phone between us. It was the video she'd made while we were setting up the tent, her talking about how peaceful it was out here. But in the background, underneath her voice, you could hear what sounded like whispering. Very faint, almost like wind, but with a rhythm to it that didn't match the breeze in the trees. "Probably just wind hitting the microphone weird," I told her. "These phones pick up all kinds of random noise." But even as I said it, something about those whispers made the hair on my arms stand up. Jessica played it again, turning the volume all the way up. This time we both heard it clearly. Voices. Multiple voices, too soft to make out words, but definitely human voices having some kind of conversation in the background of her video. "That's so weird," Jessica said, scrolling through her other videos. "Let me check the others." Every single video had the same thing: whispered conversations that neither of us had heard while she was filming. The voices were clearest in the videos she'd taken deeper in the woods, near the big pines. "Maybe it's other campers," she suggested. But we both knew we hadn't seen anyone else out here. The parking area had been empty when we got back from setting up camp. I convinced her it was probably just some acoustic trick. Sound carrying funny through the mountains, maybe voices from hikers on a different trail getting picked up by the phone's microphone in a way our ears couldn't detect. Made sense at the time. We were tired from the hike and the setup, so we decided to get some sleep. Around midnight, I woke up to Jessica shaking my shoulder. "Dad," she whispered, "do you hear that?" I listened, still half asleep, and at first heard nothing but the stream. Then I caught it. Someone calling her name from out in the woods. Jessica, clear as day, coming from somewhere past the big pines. A woman's voice, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. "That sounds like Mom," Jessica said, and she was right. It sounded exactly like Sarah calling for Jessica to come inside for dinner, the same tone she'd used 1,000 times when Jessica was younger. "Jessica, come. Here, honey." The voice was getting closer, moving through the trees toward our camp. I unzipped the tent flap and looked out. The fire had burned down to coals, just enough light to see the nearest trees. No one was out there, but the voice kept calling. Now it was coming from a different direction, like whoever was calling had moved to the other side of our campsite. "Jessica, where are you?" "Should I answer?" Jessica whispered, but something in my gut said absolutely not. This was wrong. Sarah was back in Charlotte, probably asleep in the apartment she'd rented after we separated. She definitely wasn't wandering around the Pisgah National Forest at midnight calling for our daughter. The voices multiplied. I heard my own voice calling from the direction of the creek. "Jessica, come help your dad." Then Sarah's voice again, but from the opposite side. "Jessica, we need to talk." Then another voice, older, that made Jessica gasp. "That's Grandma Kay," she breathed. Jessica's grandmother had died the previous spring, and hearing her voice out here in the dark made my skin crawl. "Come to Grandma, sweetheart. I've missed you so much." Jessica started to unzip the tent, like she was going to walk out toward the voices. I grabbed her wrist. "No," I said firmly. "That's not your grandmother." But even as I said it, the voice was so perfectly accurate. The slight rasp from years of smoking, the way she'd always called Jessica sweetheart, with that extra soft tone. If I hadn't buried Kay myself 6 months ago, I would have believed it was really her. The voices kept calling all night, taking turns, moving around our campsite in a slow circle. Sometimes they'd all call at once from different directions, creating this horrible chorus of familiar voices saying Jessica's name. My ex-wife, my mother, Jessica's grandmother, my brother Mike, who lived in California. All of them, calling for Jessica to come deeper into the woods. Jessica had her phone out, recording everything. The screen showed she was capturing audio, but when she played it back, we could hear full conversations now. Not just whispers, but clear discussions between family members. I heard my own voice having an argument with Sarah that I recognized from 2 years ago when we'd fought about Jessica's curfew. Word for word, exactly as it had happened in our kitchen on a Tuesday night in March. "The phone's picking up our old fights," Jessica whispered, staring at the screen. "How's it doing that?" The recordings got more specific, more personal. Private conversations I'd had with Sarah about our marriage problems, talks Jessica had never heard, arguments from before Jessica was born, discussions about whether we were ready to be parents, intimate conversations that had happened in our bedroom, fights that had happened in lawyers' offices. "These trees are remembering everything," I said. And it sounded crazy even as I said it, but it was the only explanation that made sense. Somehow this forest was storing every conversation that had ever happened here and playing them back. The voices got more aggressive as the night went on. Instead of calling Jessica's name sweetly, they started demanding she come out of the tent. "Jessica, get out here right now," in my voice, using the tone I'd use when she was in trouble. "Don't make me come in there and get you," in Sarah's voice, angry and threatening. These weren't things we'd actually said, but they sounded so much like us that Jessica started crying. "They're using our voices to hurt each other," she sobbed. The phone was recording Jessica saying she hated me saying I'd never wanted kids, Sarah saying Jessica was a mistake. None of us had ever said these things, but hearing them in our own voices was devastating. The forest was weaponizing our own words against us, creating the worst possible versions of conversations we'd never had. Around dawn, Jessica started sleepwalking. I woke up to find her halfway out of the tent, still asleep but moving toward the voices that were calling her name. They weren't angry anymore. Now they were pleading, desperate. "Jessica, we need you," in her grandmother's voice. "Come be with us, sweetheart. We're all here waiting for you." I had to physically pull her back into the tent and hold on to her. Every time I let go, she'd try to get up and walk toward the voices. She was still asleep, but responding to the calls like they were real family members in distress. I ended up tying my belt around her wrist and the other end around my own wrist, so I'd wake up if she tried to leave again. By sunrise, I'd had enough. We were packing up camp, no discussion. But Jessica was different now. She kept looking toward the trees like she was listening for something, tilting her head at sounds I couldn't hear. When I asked what was wrong, she said she could still hear Grandma Kay calling for her, even though the voices had stopped when the sun came up. We loaded everything into our packs and started hiking out, but Jessica kept stopping to look back. "She sounds so sad, Dad. What if she really needs help?" I had to keep reminding her that her grandmother was dead, that whatever was calling her name wasn't really Kay. But the voices had been so convincing, so perfectly accurate, that part of Jessica still believed they were real. The hike out should have taken 2 hours, but it took us 4 because Jessica kept trying to wander off the trail towards sounds I couldn't hear. I had to hold her hand like she was 5 years old again, keeping her moving toward the parking area. Every few minutes, she'd stop and say, "Dad, did you hear that? Someone called my name." When we finally reached the truck, Jessica's phone had hours of recordings from the night, but when we played them back in daylight, they were all silent, just the sound of wind in the trees and our own voices talking. All evidence of the conversations, the arguments, the pleading voices, everything was gone, like it had never happened. I still can't explain what we experienced out there. Jessica doesn't talk about it much, but she's never been the same. She stopped making TikTok videos, stopped wanting to spend time outdoors. She's 19 now in college and she still won't go camping. Won't even sit outside if it's too quiet. She needs background noise constantly. TV, music, podcasts. The silence makes her anxious, like she's waiting for voices to start calling her name. Me? I can't handle quiet forests anymore either. When I'm delivering packages to houses out in the country, if I have to walk through trees to get to the door, I talk to myself the whole way. Sing songs, make noise, anything to fill the silence. Because I learned something important that night in Pisgah. Some places collect sounds the way caves collect water. And when enough voices gather in one place, they start calling for more. I've never gone back to those woods, and I never will. But sometimes on very quiet nights, I still wake up thinking I hear Sarah's voice calling Jessica's name from outside my apartment window, just for a second, before I remember where I am. The voices in the pines got their hooks in both of us that weekend, and I don't think they ever fully let go. I'm 26 and work as a medical assistant at a family clinic in this small town in Virginia. It's not glamorous work, but I like helping people, and honestly, the pay's decent enough that I can afford my own place and still have some money left over for the occasional weekend trip. My sister Anna is 2 years younger than me and teaches 3rd grade at the elementary school here. She's always been the outdoorsy one between us. While I was studying for my certification, she was out hiking trails and taking pictures of everything from wildflowers to old barns. That's actually how we ended up planning this camping trip to George Washington National Forest. Anna had been talking for months about these rare wildflowers that supposedly only bloom deep in the old growth sections, and she'd been dying to photograph them before the season ended. We'd been planning the trip for weeks. Anna had done all her research, found the perfect spot about 4 miles into the forest following an old logging road that most people never bother with anymore. She was so excited about finding these flowers that she'd already cleared space on her camera's memory card and bought new batteries for her flash. The plan was simple: hike in Friday afternoon, set up camp, spend Saturday morning hunting for the flowers, then hike back out Sunday. I figured it would be good for me to get away from the clinic for a weekend and spend some time with my sister. Looking back now, I wish we'd just gone to one of the regular campgrounds instead. We started our hike around 2 in the afternoon on a Friday in late September. The weather was perfect. Cool enough that we wouldn't sweat too much carrying our packs, but warm enough that we didn't need heavy jackets. The old logging road was easy to follow at first, just 2 tire ruts grown over with grass, but the deeper we went, the more overgrown it became. Anna was in her element, stopping every few hundred yards to take pictures of interesting plants or unusual rock formations. I have to admit it was beautiful out there. The trees were massive, oaks and maples that had to be over 100 years old, creating this canopy so thick that even in the middle of the day, everything had this soft, filtered light. We found our campsite exactly where Anna's research had said it would be, in a small clearing surrounded by these enormous oaks. The ground was level and mostly clear of rocks, and there was even a little stream running nearby for water. Anna immediately started unpacking her camera gear while I set up our tent. She was like a kid in a candy store, pointing out different plants and explaining which ones she wanted to photograph first thing in the morning. After we got camp set up, we still had a few hours of daylight left, so Anna convinced me to help her scout around for the flowers she was looking for. That's when things started to go wrong, though we didn't realize it at the time. The undergrowth was thicker than we'd expected, full of thorny vines and bushes that caught on our clothes and scratched our arms. Anna was determined to push through to reach this cluster of unusual flowers she'd spotted growing near a fallen log about 50 yards from our campsite. I helped her clear a path, and we both got pretty scratched up in the process. Nothing serious, just the kind of cuts you'd expect from hiking through heavy brush. We collected some samples like Anna had planned, and she got her photos before the light started to fade. That evening, we sat by our little camp stove eating dinner and looking at the pictures Anna had taken on her camera's display. The cuts on our arms were already looking a little red and irritated, but that seemed normal enough. We'd both been scratched by thorns before. Anna put some antiseptic on the deeper cuts, and we figured that would be enough. We were both tired from the hike and the excitement of finding the flowers, so we turned in early, planning to get up at sunrise to take advantage of the morning light for more photography. I woke up around dawn, feeling strange. My arms felt tight and sore, and when I looked down at the cuts from the day before, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The scratches had these green lines running away from them, like someone had drawn on my skin with a marker. But when I looked closer, the lines weren't on my skin. They were under it, visible through the surface like veins, except they were bright green instead of blue. They looked exactly like the root systems you see when you pull up a plant, branching and spreading up my arms toward my shoulders. Anna woke up when she heard me moving around, and when she saw her own arms, she just stared. Her cuts were worse than mine. The green lines had spread further, reaching her shoulders and starting to creep across her chest. We both tried to tell ourselves it was just some kind of infection, maybe an allergic reaction to the plants we'd touched. But deep down, we knew this wasn't normal. The lines were too organized, too much like actual plant roots to be any kind of rash or infection we'd ever seen. The really weird part was how we felt. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it was like we could sense the forest around us in a way we never had before. I could tell which plants were healthy and which ones were struggling. Anna walked over to a wilted fern near our tent and just stood there for a minute, and I swear the thing perked up while she was looking at it. When she touched it, the leaves actually seemed to get greener. By mid-morning, the green veins had grown longer, following what looked like our actual blood vessels toward our hearts. We should have been panicked, should have packed up and hiked straight back to the car. But instead, we found ourselves walking deeper into the forest. It wasn't really a conscious decision, more like we were being called to go in a particular direction. Anna seemed to know exactly where she was going, weaving between trees and over fallen logs like she'd walked this path 100 times before. We came to a grove where the trees formed an almost perfect circle, and in the center was this massive oak that had to be centuries old. Its trunk was so wide that it would have taken 6 or 7 people holding hands to reach around it. Anna walked straight up to it and pressed her palms against the bark, and I watched the green lines on her arms pulse like a heartbeat. She stayed like that for maybe 10 minutes, and when she finally stepped back, I could see that the tree looked healthier somehow. Areas of bark that had been gray and dead-looking were now rich brown, and new leaves were sprouting from branches that had been bare. That's when I started to understand what was happening to us. The forest was making us part of it. The green infection spreading through our bodies wasn't killing us. It was changing us, connecting us to every plant for miles around. I could feel their needs like they were my own. I knew without looking which trees needed water, which ones were diseased, where the soil was too acidic or too sandy. It was like having access to this vast network of information that had been there all along, just waiting for us to plug into it. The changes weren't just internal. By that afternoon, small leaves had started growing directly out of our skin where the green lines were thickest. They were tiny at first, no bigger than my fingernail, but I could feel them absorbing sunlight and actually converting it to energy. I wasn't hungry, wasn't thirsty. The photosynthesis was keeping me going. Anna's hair was changing too, turning green and growing longer, starting to look more like vines than actual hair. When she moved, it swayed like it was underwater, and I caught her talking to it it could hear her. My fingernails were hardening and growing pointed, turning into something more like thorns. They were perfect for digging in the soil, and when I climbed over a fallen tree, they gripped the bark better than my regular fingers ever could have. Every change felt natural while it was happening, like my body was just becoming what it was always supposed to be. We met others that evening, or what had been others, once upon a time. They'd been campers too, from different years, different seasons. Some looked mostly human still, just with bark-like patches on their skin and leaves growing from their hair. Others were so far along in the transformation that they were more tree than person, rooted in place but still conscious, still able to talk. They lived in hollow trees now, they told us, sustained completely by sunlight and nutrients they pulled from the soil through their roots. They weren't angry or sad about what had happened to them. If anything, they seemed peaceful, content in a way I'd never seen in any human being. They tried to explain that becoming part of the forest's root network meant eternal life, perfect understanding of the natural world, and a purpose larger than anything we could imagine as regular people. We would become the forest's guardians, they said, protecting it from the damage that humans caused, healing the sick plants, nurturing new growth. Anna was further along than I was. By the second day, her feet had started growing these thin white tendrils that burrowed into the soil wherever she stood. She couldn't walk normally anymore, had to stay connected to the ground. When she tried to pull away, she cried out in pain, and the tendrils bled this green sap that smelled like fresh-cut grass. She kept saying she could feel the entire forest through those root connections, every tree and bush and flower, all of it flowing through her like she was part of one massive organism. The bark patches on my skin were spreading, rough and brown like oak bark. In direct sunlight, I could feel the photosynthesis happening, and my leaf skin, this warm, pleasant sensation that was better than any meal I'd ever eaten. The forest was showing us visions of what we'd become if we let the transformation complete. Beautiful human-tree hybrids with bark skin and vine hair, rooted in place but connected to everything, immortal as long as the forest lived. Part of me wanted it. The peace, the connection, the sense of belonging to something bigger than myself. But my medical training kept kicking in, telling me this was wrong, that we were losing ourselves to some kind of parasitic infection. While Anna was too far gone to want treatment, I started looking around the forest for plants that might help fight whatever was changing us. I found what I needed growing near the stream where we'd gotten our water. Wild garlic, echinacea, and something that looked like plantain, natural antibiotics and immune system boosters. I crushed them into a paste using rocks and mixed it with stream water. Anna tried to stop me when she realized what I was doing. She actually grabbed my wrists with hands that were more bark than skin and begged me not to fight the change, but I held her down and applied the plant medicine to both our infected cuts, even though she screamed like I was torturing her. The forest fought back. Poisonous plants that hadn't been there before sprouted up around us. Thorny vines grew across the path back to our campsite. The friendly tree people from the day before turned hostile, trying to convince me I was making a terrible mistake, that I was throwing away paradise for the misery of normal human existence. But the plant medicine worked. Over the next few hours, I watched the green veins in our arms start to die back, retreating from our hearts toward the original cuts. Anna's transformation reversed more slowly and more painfully. The bark patches on her skin cracked and fell off, bleeding underneath. Her root tendrils withered and broke off at the soil line. Her vine hair turned brown and brittle, falling out in clumps. She was in agony for hours, writhing and crying as her body remembered how to be human. When it was over, we were ourselves again, more or less. The forest released us. The hostile plants retreated, the paths cleared, the tree people disappeared back into their hollow homes. We hiked out Sunday morning, both of us weak and shaky, but alive. Anna barely spoke the entire way back to the car. We never went camping together again after that. Anna stopped taking nature photography altogether, actually. She won't even keep houseplants anymore. We both still have these small green patches on our arms where the deepest cuts were, and if I stand in bright sunlight, I can feel them absorbing the light, converting it to energy, just like they did in the forest. It's not enough to live on, but it's there, this constant reminder of how close we came to becoming something else entirely. I still work at the clinic, still live in the same town, but I've never gone back to George Washington National Forest, and I never will. Sometimes, on sunny days when those green patches on my skin start to tingle, I can almost feel the forest calling to me, asking me to come back and finish what we started. I know Anna feels it too, though we've never talked about it. Looking back now, I'm not sure we made the right choice by fighting the infection. The tree people seemed so peaceful, so content. Maybe becoming part of something eternal and beautiful wouldn't have been the worst thing that could happen to us. But I guess we'll never know. I work security at a mall in Louisville, and honestly, it's not the most exciting job in the world. I'm 30 now, and I'd been doing the same routine for about 5 years, walking the same halls, checking the same doors, dealing with the same shoplifters. Back then, I kept telling myself I wanted to do something different, something that would prove I could handle myself outside of that air-conditioned building. I'd grown up camping with my dad before he passed, but I'd never tried going out on my own. That's what led me to plan a week alone in the Daniel Boone National Forest down in Kentucky. I wanted to test myself, see if I still had those outdoor skills he'd taught me when I was a kid. I spent weeks researching remote spots where I could really get away from everything. That's when I found Raven's Roost on an old topographical map I'd bought at a surplus store. The name caught my attention, and when I looked closer, I could see it was way back in the wilderness, at least 6 miles from the nearest parking area. Perfect for what I had in mind. I packed light on purpose, just basic gear, some food, water purification tablets, and a small tent. I wanted the authentic experience, not some glamping trip where I'd haul in everything but the kitchen sink. The hike-in took me most of the morning. The trail started out well marked, but after about 4 miles it turned into more of a deer path. I had to use my compass and the old map to find the ridge that would take me to Raven's Roost. When I finally got there, I understood why someone had given it that name. The clearing sat on a rocky outcrop that looked out over this massive valley filled with old-growth forest, and there were ravens everywhere, more than I'd ever seen in one place. They were perched in the trees around the clearing, just watching me as I set up camp. At first, I thought it was pretty cool. Ravens are smart birds, and I figured they were just curious about the new visitor. But as I worked on getting my shelter together and collecting firewood, I noticed they weren't making the normal sounds you'd expect, no cawing or chattering. They just sat there, turning their heads to follow my movements like they were studying me. It was a little unsettling, but I chalked it up to being in their territory. That evening, while I was getting my fire started, I walked around the edge of the clearing to gather more wood. That's when I found the first set of skulls. They were arranged in a perfect circle around the base of a big oak tree. Maybe 8 or 9 animal skulls, all facing inward. Deer, what looked like a couple of raccoons, and some smaller ones I couldn't identify right away. But here's what got my attention. They were clean. Bone white, like they'd been sitting there for years, but arranged so precisely that someone had to have put them there recently. I found 2 more circles before I gave up looking. Each one was the same. Skulls arranged by size, all facing the center, positioned with mathematical precision. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of nature display, maybe left by researchers or Forest Service people. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. Who would haul animal skulls 6 miles into the wilderness just to arrange them in pretty patterns? The next morning, I decided to explore further into the forest. I told myself I was looking for water sources and checking out the area, but really, I wanted to see if there were more of those bone arrangements. What I found was way beyond what I'd expected. The deeper I went into the valley, the more bones I discovered. Not just skulls this time, complete skeletons arranged in spirals, mandalas made from rib bones, vertebrae lined up in complex geometric patterns that stretched between trees like some kind of outdoor art installation. And some of them weren't animal bones. I'm not an expert, but I've seen enough anatomy pictures to recognize a human skull when I see one. There were at least 3 mixed in with the animal bones, incorporated into the designs like they belonged there. All of them were the same bone-white color as the animal skulls, weathered and clean, but positioned with the same careful precision as everything else. That's when I realized this wasn't random. Something was actively creating these displays, adding to them, maintaining them. Some of the arrangements had fresh bones mixed in with the old ones, bones that still had bits of tissue attached, like the animals had been killed within the last few days. The ravens seemed to be part of it somehow. They followed me as I moved through the forest, always staying about 20 feet away, never making noise. When I got too close to certain bone formations, they'd start shifting on their branches, ruffling their feathers like a warning. I started to think of them as guards. By the time I made it back to my camp that afternoon, I was seriously considering packing up and heading home. But I'd driven 5 hours to get there, hiked 6 miles with a full pack, and I didn't want to admit defeat on day 2. I convinced myself that whoever or whatever was making those bone arrangements probably avoided the main clearing where I was camped. It was probably just some weird local tradition, maybe connected to old Cherokee practices or something like that. I was wrong. That night, I woke up to the sound of bones being moved. Not loud, just a quiet clicking and scraping, like someone was arranging pieces on a game board. It was coming from just outside my tent, maybe 10 feet away. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what I was hearing, when I realized the sounds had a rhythm to them. Methodical, purposeful. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap as quietly as I could. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a rabbit skeleton laid out in a perfect spiral, maybe 5 feet from my tent. The bones were still connected by dried ligaments, arranged so carefully that it looked like a piece of art. And they were warm. When I finally worked up the courage to crawl out and touch one of the bones, it was still warm, like the animal had been killed and cleaned within the past hour. But here's what really got to me. I'd been awake for at least 20 minutes, listening to the sounds. In that time, I hadn't heard anything moving away from my campsite. Whatever had arranged those bones was still out there, somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. I spent the rest of that night sitting by my fire, feeding it every stick I could find, trying to keep a circle of light around me. The ravens never left. Even in the dark, I could see their silhouettes in the trees, watching, waiting. The next day, I started noticing that the bone arrangements were forming a larger pattern with my campsite at the center. I could see it from the rocky outcrop where I'd set up, spirals and circles and geometric shapes spreading out through the forest in all directions, with my little clearing right in the middle like the center of a target. That afternoon, I saw it. I was up on the rocks, trying to get a better view of the pattern, when something moved through the trees below me. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe another hiker who could help me make sense of what I was seeing. But as it got closer, I realized it was way too tall to be human. 9 feet at least, moving through the forest without making a sound despite its size. It was carrying something in its arms, bones, lots of them, cradled like firewood. The thing stopped in a clearing about 50 yards from my camp and started working. I could see it arranging the bones it had brought, placing each one with the same careful precision I'd seen in all the other displays. It moved like an artist, stepping back to check its work, adjusting individual bones until the pattern was perfect. That's when I understood what I was looking at. This wasn't some random forest creature or even a person. This was an artist, and the entire forest was its gallery. Every bone arrangement, every spiral and mandala and geometric pattern, they were all part of one massive installation that had been growing for years, maybe decades. And I was supposed to be the centerpiece. I could see other skeletons worked into the older arrangements as I looked around. Human skeletons, positioned like they'd been willing participants, arranged peacefully among the animal bones like they belonged there. Previous campers, maybe. Other hikers who'd found their way to Raven's Roost and never made it back out. The thing, I started thinking of it as the collector, worked for hours while I watched from the rocks. The ravens helped, bringing its smaller bones, dropping them in specific spots like they understood their role in the process. As the sun started to set, the collector looked up at me on the rocks. Even from that distance, I could feel it studying me, planning where I would fit into its design. That's when I knew I had to get out of there. I waited until the collector moved deeper into the forest, then climbed down and started breaking apart the bone arrangements closest to my camp. I kicked over the spirals, scattered the circles, destroyed as much of the artwork as I could reach. The ravens went crazy, cawing and diving at me, but I kept going. I figured if I could mess up enough of the collector's work, it would be too busy fixing things to come after me. It worked, sort of. When the collector realized what I was doing, it let out this sound. Not quite human, not quite animal, but definitely angry. It started moving back toward me, but when it saw the extent of the damage, it stopped. I could see it standing there, looking at decades of destroyed artwork, and I knew it was making a choice between chasing me and saving what it could of its creation. It chose the art. I grew gross, abbed my pack, and ran. Didn't even bother breaking down the tent, just stuffed my sleeping bag and water bottles in the pack and started moving toward the trail. The ravens followed me for the first couple of miles, circling overhead, calling out warnings to the collector. But as I got further from Raven's Roost, they turned back. I made it to my truck just after sunrise, threw my gear in the back, and drove straight home to Louisville. Didn't stop for food, didn't stop for gas until I was back in familiar territory with cell phone coverage and traffic lights, and all the normal sounds of civilization. Looking back now, I still wonder about that place. Part of me thinks the collector wasn't evil exactly. It was just doing what it had always done. Creating art, adding to its collection, maintaining its gallery in the deep woods. The people who ended up in those bone arrangements, maybe they'd chosen to stay. Maybe they'd seen the beauty in what it was creating and decided to become part of something larger than themselves. But I wasn't ready for that kind of immortality. I never went back to Daniel Boone National Forest. Hell, I haven't been camping alone since then. I still work security at the mall, still walk the same routes and check the same doors. But now I'm okay with that routine. There's something to be said for ordinary, predictable days where the biggest excitement is catching someone trying to shoplift from the food court. Sometimes when I see ravens in the mall parking lot, I wonder if they're scouts. If the collector is still out there, still working on its forest gallery, still looking for the right pieces to complete its masterpiece. But then the ravens fly away, and I go back inside where it's safe and boring and completely, wonderfully normal. I still have that old topographical map somewhere. Every now and then I think about throwing it away, but I never do. Part of me wants to remember exactly where Raven's Roost is, just so I can make sure I never accidentally end up there again. Because if I did go back, I'm not sure I'd have the strength to run away a second time. There was something beautiful about those bone arrangements, something peaceful about the way the human skeletons were positioned among the art. And the collector had been patient with me, giving me time to understand what I was seeing, what I was being offered. Next time, I might not want to leave at all. I'm 27 and work nights cleaning an office building downtown. Honestly, it's not the worst job I've had, but after months of fluorescent lights and empty cubicles, I was craving something real, something wild. My girlfriend Amy had been talking about wanting to see actual wildlife in their natural habitat. She works at a veterinary clinic and spends most days dealing with pampered house cats and overweight beagles. When she suggested we take a long weekend and go camping somewhere truly remote, I jumped at the chance. We'd been together about 8 months at that point, and I figured a romantic trip into the mountains might be exactly what we both needed. Amy did most of the research. She found this place called Panther Hollow, way up in the remote parts of West Virginia. No designated campgrounds, no cell service, no other people for miles around. The kind of place where you hike in with everything on your back and hope you remembered to pack enough batteries for your flashlight. She was excited about the wildlife photography opportunities. Amy's one of those people who gets genuinely thrilled about documenting animal behavior. She'd bought this fancy motion-activated camera setup specifically for the trip. The plan was simple. Hike in Friday afternoon, set up camp by the stream, spend the weekend taking pictures of whatever nocturnal creatures called those mountains home. I'll be honest, I was more interested in the isolation than the photography. After dealing with people's garbage and listening to office politics echo through empty hallways all week, the idea of being somewhere completely cut off from civilization sounded like paradise. We loaded up my truck with camping gear, drove about 4 hours into increasingly narrow mountain roads, then hiked another 2 miles into the hollow, carrying everything we'd need for 3 days. The spot Amy had picked was perfect. A small clearing beside a mountain stream, surrounded by old-growth forest that felt like it hadn't been touched by human hands in decades. The trees were massive, oak and maple and pine that must have been growing there since before my grandfather was born. The stream was crystal clear and cold enough to make your teeth ache. We set up our tent on level ground about 20 feet from the water, built a fire ring with stones from the stream bed, and spent that first evening just soaking in how quiet everything was. Amy set up her cameras before dark. She had 3 of them, these digital trail cameras that activate when they detect movement. She placed them in a triangle around our campsite, about 50 yards out, aimed at game trails she'd spotted during our initial scout of the area. The cameras had infrared capability so they could capture clear images even in complete darkness. She was hoping to photograph deer, maybe a black bear, possibly even a bobcat if we got lucky. That first night was everything we'd hoped for. We sat by the fire, watched the stars come out brighter than I'd ever seen them, and listened to the normal sounds of a healthy forest. Owls calling back and forth, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, water flowing over rocks. Amy was practically vibrating with excitement every time she heard something moving in the darkness beyond our firelight. "Did you hear that?" she'd whisper. "I think there's something big out there." I remember falling asleep to the sound of that stream, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. Amy curled up against me in our sleeping bag, already planning what she might find on the cameras in the morning. If I'd known what those cameras were actually going to capture, I would have packed everything up right then and hiked back to the truck in the dark. The next morning, Amy was up before sunrise to check her cameras. I was still nursing my first cup of camp coffee when I heard her calling my name from the edge of the clearing. Her voice had this strange quality to it, not scared, exactly, but definitely not the excited tone I'd expected. "Kevin, you need to see this," she called. "I mean, you really need to see this right now." I walked over to where she was standing with one of her cameras, staring at the display screen. The look on her face was somewhere between fascination and complete bewilderment. She handed me the camera without saying a word. The photos were unlike anything I'd ever seen. The infrared had captured perfect images of creatures moving through the forest, but they weren't moving on 4 legs like deer or bears. They were walking upright, on 2 legs, but their bodies were all wrong. Human-sized, maybe even a bit taller, but covered in dark fur. Their limbs were too long, especially the arms, which hung down past where their knees would be. And their faces, Jesus, their faces were the worst part. Canine features like wolves or large dogs, but with something disturbingly intelligent in their eyes. "There's more," Amy said, scrolling through the images. "Look at this." The creatures had circled our campsite multiple times. The timestamps showed they'd been active for hours, moving in what looked like an organized pattern, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups. But the really unsettling part was how they were behaving. In several photos, you could see them using sticks to poke at our tent and equipment. Not random prodding, deliberate, careful investigation, like they were trying to understand what these strange objects were. Amy's veterinary training kicked in immediately. She started analyzing the photos like she was studying animal behavior patterns. "Look at the way they're positioned relative to each other," she said. pointing at images where multiple creatures appeared in the same frame. This is coordinated group behavior. They're communicating with each other, probably planning something. What really got to me was that despite having clear photographic evidence of these things walking around our camp for hours, there wasn't a single footprint in the soft earth around our tent. Not one. It was like they didn't weigh anything at all. We spent most of that morning going through every image on all 3 cameras. The pattern was consistent across all of them. These creatures had studied our campsite from every angle, examined our equipment, even appeared to be testing the perimeter of our camp like they were mapping out our defenses. Amy counted at least 12 different individuals in the photos, possibly more. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "The anatomy doesn't match any known species. The behavior is too sophisticated for most large predators. And the tool use..." She trailed off, staring at a photo that clearly showed one of the creatures using a branch to lift the corner of our tent's rainfly. I wanted to pack up and leave right then. Every instinct I had was screaming that we were in danger, that we were being hunted by something that understood us better than we understood it. But Amy was fascinated. This was the kind of discovery that could change everything. New species, complex behavior, possible evidence of unknown North American primates. She convinced me to stay another night. If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already, she reasoned. They had hours of opportunity. They're obviously curious about humans, but they're not aggressive. This could be the scientific discovery of the century. I should have trusted my gut. I should have insisted we pack up immediately and hike back to civilization. Instead, I let Amy's scientific curiosity override my survival instincts. That second night, the forest went completely silent. No owls, no insects, no small animals rustling through the leaves. Even the stream seemed to be flowing more quietly. The only sounds were the crackling of our campfire and our own breathing. Around 10 p.m., we started hearing the howling. Not one voice, but multiple voices, calling to each other, from different directions around our campsite. The sounds weren't random. They had structure, rhythm, like a complex conversation happening in a language we couldn't understand. Amy recognized it immediately as coordinated pack behavior. "They're hunting," she whispered. "This is how wolves communicate during a hunt. They're surrounding their prey and coordinating their approach." The howls were coming from all sides now, north, south, east, west, and points in between. We were completely encircled. But these weren't wolf howls. They were deeper, more complex, with tonal variations that suggested far more sophisticated vocal capabilities than any known canine species. Then we heard the running. Bipedal footsteps moving at incredible speed, circling our campsite in a tight pattern. Whatever these things were, they could run upright faster than any human, and they were doing it almost silently. Just the faintest whisper of movement through the undergrowth, but moving fast enough that we could track their progress around us like cars on a racetrack. Amy grabbed my arm. "They're testing us," she said, "probing for weaknesses, looking for the best angle of attack." The creatures began to probe our defenses directly. We heard tapping sounds on the fabric of our tent, gentle at first, then more insistent. Something was examining our gear, lifting our water bottles, rattling our cookware. They were being careful not to damage anything, but they were definitely investigating everything we'd brought with us. "They're learning," Amy observed, her scientific training helping her stay calm even as terror crept into her voice. "They're studying our equipment to understand our capabilities. This is problem-solving behavior way beyond anything you'd see in normal predators." Around midnight, the psychological warfare began. I heard my mother's voice calling my name from the forest. Clear as day, exactly the way she sounded when she was worried about me. "Kevin! Kevin, where are you? I need help!" I actually stood up before Amy grabbed my arm and pulled me back down. "That's not your mother," she hissed. "That's impossible. We're 50 miles from the nearest town." But it sounded exactly like her. Same inflection, same worried tone she used when I hadn't called home in too long. Every instinct I had was telling me to go help her, that something terrible had happened and she needed me. Then Amy heard her father's voice. Then her sister. Then voices of friends, coworkers, family members, all calling to us from different directions in the forest, all asking for help, all sounding perfectly authentic. They've been watching other people, Amy realized, listening to human interactions, learning how to reproduce our voices. They're using our own psychology against us, exploiting our instinct to help people we care about. The voices became more sophisticated as the night progressed. We started hearing perfect reproductions of conversations we'd had earlier that day, played back to us from the darkness. My voice asking Amy about the camera settings, her voice commenting on the wildlife photos. Even mundane exchanges about what to have for dinner, reproduced with perfect accuracy. But the worst moment came around 3 a.m. when I heard Amy's voice calling my name from outside the tent. Except Amy was right next to me, pressing herself against my side, trembling with fear. "Kevin," her voice called from the darkness. "Kevin, come out here. I found something amazing. You have to see this." The voice was perfect. If I hadn't been able to feel the real Amy breathing beside me, I would have been completely convinced it was her. But there was something just slightly off about the cadence, like someone learning a new language and getting the grammar right. But Maj, sing the subtle emotional undertones that make speech feel natural. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. As the first gray light began to filter through the forest canopy, the voices stopped. The howling ceased. The forest slowly came back to life, with the normal sounds of birds and small animals going about their morning routines. Amy checked her cameras again. The night's footage was extensive and deeply disturbing. The creatures had revealed themselves more fully this time. Tall, bipedal forms covered in dark fur, with elongated limbs and distinctly canine faces. But what was most unsettling was their behavior. They moved with obvious intelligence, using hand signals to communicate with each other, coordinating their movements like a military unit. The pack leader was clearly visible in several shots, larger than the others, with distinctive white markings on its face and chest. It directed the others with obvious authority, positioning them around our campsite with strategic precision. In one particularly clear image, you could see it pointing at our tent, while two other creatures flanked around to the opposite side. "They've been studying us," Amy said, her scientific fascination now completely overwhelmed by fear. "Not just last night, but probably since the moment we arrived. Learning our patterns, our behaviors, our weaknesses." We were packing up to leave when Amy noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh images on the cameras, captured just after sunrise. The creatures were still there, watching us from the tree line as we broke down our camp. 12 of them, standing in a perfect line just beyond the range of normal human vision. Watching, waiting. "We need to leave now," I said. "Right now." But Amy's veterinary training had given her one crucial insight. "Pack animals respect dominance displays," she said. "If we run, they'll see us as prey. But if we can establish ourselves as the dominant presence..." It was insane, but it was our only option. We couldn't outrun creatures that could move that fast through terrain they knew better, or than we did. We had to make them believe we were more dangerous than they were. We loaded our packs and started walking toward the tree line where the creatures were waiting. Not hurrying, not showing fear, but moving with deliberate confidence. Amy made us appear larger by holding camping gear above our heads. We maintained direct eye contact with the pack leader, showing no submission or fear. The creatures backed off as we approached, melting into the forest but staying visible at the edge of our peripheral vision. They followed us for the entire 2-mile hike back to the truck, always maintaining a respectful distance, but never letting us out of their sight. When we reached the truck, they stopped at what must have been the boundary of their territory. The pack leader stood on a fallen log about 50 yards away and watched us load our gear. As we drove away, I could see him in my rearview mirror, still standing there, still watching. Amy never published her findings. The photos were too clear, too undeniable, and she knew no one would believe them anyway. She quit the veterinary clinic 6 months later and moved to Arizona. We tried to stay together, but the experience had changed us both in ways that made a normal relationship impossible. I still work the night shift at the office building, but I can't handle silence anymore. I keep the radio on constantly now, need the sound of human voices to feel safe. I've never been camping since, never planned to. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in those empty offices, I still hear my mother's voice calling my name from the darkness beyond the windows. Looking back, I think we were lucky. I think those things, whatever they were, let us go because we showed them the respect they demanded. But I also think they're still out there in Panther Hollow, studying anyone foolish enough to venture into their territory. Learning, planning, waiting for someone who doesn't understand the rules of their particular game. I've never told this story to anyone before now. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway. But if you're ever planning a camping trip in remote West Virginia, maybe pick somewhere else. Somewhere with other people around. Somewhere that doesn't go completely silent after dark. Trust me on this one.